Hello and welcome into the 24/7 Sports Football Recruiting Podcast. I'm National Recruiting Analyst Cooper Petagna alongside 24/7 Sports Director of Scouting Andrew Ivins. We got a loaded show for you today, fireworks, duds, all that type of stuff. But before we get into that, Drew, take me through just a 4th of July in the Ivins household. I see you got a little bronze, you got the pool in the back, we got our dog Murph, we got the wife Morgan. I mean, take me through the 4th of July. Dogs, burgers, what do we got?
I was on the grill for sure. Brisket on July 4th, 4 days in the pool, little golf mixed in there. It was a good weekend, man. Nice time to recharge. What about you?
A little bit of golf. Uh, the game is not in a great place right now. I think I'm at the point where I think everybody who plays golf kind of understands this. It's really not physical anymore. It's mental. You get to a certain point where you're like, all right, I think I'm going to take the next step. I got there. I never took the next step, and I've just regressed. I need like a psychologist at this point. I think that's kind of where I'm at. Maybe golf meditation. I don't really know. You're on the upswing though. I think you cracked 100, right? You're working your way towards 90. You haven't played for long, so you got some momentum building there a little bit on the links, huh?
Yeah, and I got a big golf weekend coming up playing Lake Nona with some of the college buddies. So I'm in the grind, man. I'm in the working through it. I would give myself a 3-star grade right now for my golf game. Probably a 2-star off the tee.
It's a journey, and it's a journey that will always be a journey. I don't think you'll ever get there. But about golf, Drew. There's a lot going on. We kind of paraphrase this show really kind of as like 4th of July fireworks. So we'll get into fireworks. We'll get into duds. We'll take viewer questions at the end of the show. But before we do that, Drew, we got a 2025 Top 247 update coming out tomorrow, and we talked a little bit about it yesterday on the recruiting show with Emily Proud, what that kind of looks like. But I'm going to read to you again. You're the director of scouting. We're coming off of a long off season, Elite 11 finals, obviously OT7 finals as well. What can we expect for tomorrow for the Top 247 refresh?
Well, not a ton of wholesale changes, right, Cooper? I mean, I think you would agree with me. This is the best we've ever felt. I think about our top 247 at this stage in the process, this stage in the cycle. And I know everyone's making commitments. Recruiting classes are filling up. There's a ton of schools out there with, 20 plus kids that have made verbal pledges to them. But those all important senior seasons are right around the corner, right? And that's the luxury we have. Me and you, Cooper, we're not trying to build out our recruiting class right now and then focus on the season, right? We're just trying to get the rankings right. And really, when we go back to that update in May, when we expanded our 5-star field from 16 to 32, I thought we were pretty buttoned up. And then obviously, we just had the Elite 11 finals, like you said. You said the overtime OT7 championship. We had our guys at the Texas State 7-on-7 tournament. There's been various camps, elite college showcases. So we've got some exposure to these guys. And that is what is going to fuel this update. It's not really coming through and making wholesale changes. Yes, we've got some new information on certain individuals. But when we went in there, right, the day 3 range, right, so you're looking at 150 to 247, it was hard to pull guys out, and I think that's a good thing. That's how buttoned up we feel about the current top 247. So what can you expect on Wednesday? Quarterback movement. That's going to fuel this update. We got the Elite 11 finals, and this isn't our first exposure to these quarterbacks, right? We've studied their junior seasons at length. We've seen some of them as sophomore and freshman, but we got all 20 of those guys in the same setting. And yes, not everyone was there, but some of these quarterback moves we were waiting to see. Okay, we're going to get a 3-day up close exam at them, and that's going to fuel some of these changes. So I think we got about like 8 new names in total going in. We're going to have 2 new 5-stars. We're going to have another quarterback enter the top 247, and really we're setting the stage for the fall months. That early October, late September, after we get those 4 and 5 games of the senior seasons, that's when there's going to be more movement. And then obviously we'll have the All-Star games in January, and then we're going to put a bow on this thing. So not a ton of changes, more so just getting people in the right neighborhood heading into those senior seasons. And Coop, I didn't even realize this. Like, we're 6 weeks away, I think, from high school football on Friday nights.
Yeah, pretty crazy. And I was going through my area, Alabama, Mississippi, Tennessee, Kentucky, not just the top 247 guys, but the guys outside of it. I feel like we've done a lot better job, especially over the last 12 months, thanks to our friends at NextGen. We've kind of tweaked some things. But really, outside of the top 247, focusing on those guys that might be knocking on the door, maybe those guys in that 250 to 350 range that have an opportunity to potentially play their way into a top 247 spot. Drew, I think the other thing that you mentioned that's really important, the context here. I think a lot of people are going to look at tomorrow's update. A lot of it's going to be positive. There's going to be some negative. There are going to be guys dropping in the rankings as well. And they're going to say, well, how did you reach that conclusion off of one 3-day performance at the Elite 11 finals in LA? And to Drew's point, everything's kind of been building up to this event in Los Angeles. And what I mean by that is 2 to 3 year exposure points on these guys. Now we've seen the majority of quarterbacks, seen the top 20 quarterbacks live. We have a good feel of not only what they look like, but what they look like compared to some of the top signal callers in the country. So that will be the result not only of one weekend, but 2 to 3 years of data point studying these guys, and that's what you'll see tomorrow. So just a reminder, Top 247 update tomorrow. You can find that right here on the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel. Make sure you don't miss it. Also, we'll have some articles out on 247sports.com for everything that you need to know for the 2025 Top 247 update. All right, Drew, we said there were going to be fireworks, and there were fireworks, certainly, over the weekend. And I'll start it off a little bit of an alternate start here, but I'll take the tee box first. How about Missouri, man? Missouri is one of those teams, and I think I've learned my lesson here over the last couple of years. You got to give these these coaches a little bit of grace, and you got to give them a little bit of time. Eli Drinkowitz is certainly a prime example of that. Missouri right now, number 13 in the 24/7 Sports composite team rankings. They're headed for their third top 20 finish in the last 4 years under Drink. And Drew, you think about the guys that they've added: Donovan Olabode from IMG Academy by way of Illinois, Lamont Rogers from Texas. You think about other guys like Javen Boggs from Cocoa down there in Florida. Drew, they got a lot of positive going on. You mentioned Matt Zoller's one of those guys that's certainly in the conversation for a top 32 spot, and a guy that we're really high on. But Missouri, right now, I believe only has 16 commitments. There's a lot of meat left on the bone. And if one of those programs you kind of look at that says, you know what, the NIL era, and then you pair that with the success that they've had on the field, they've gone all in, and they have been very serious about their commitment to winning at Missouri. That resulted in a Cotton Bowl New Year's Six victory last year over Ohio State. You go out, you get a guy like Luther Burden 2 years ago. Then you follow that up with Williams Winery. Now you got a guy like Zollers, Olabode, Lamont Rogers, Javen Boggs, Jack Lang. They just continue to kind of pile on the momentum here. And then outside of that, Drew, sure, there's headliners that we're going to continue to talk about. I think they've been a really crafty scouting program as well, building that roster from the ground up. So Missouri, you talk about fireworks, you talk about a team doing it the right way, complementary pieces. You're going to lose Luther Burden, Theo Weiss, bring in Olabode, Boggs. You're getting big on the offensive line. I mean, 6'6.5" with Lamont Rogers over 300 pounds, 7-foot wingspan. You get Caden Green from Oklahoma. You got Jack Lang, another big bruiser as well. This is a team that is no longer just like middle of the pack SEC. I think they're kind of changing the tune to a team that you can expect to battle for 9-10 wins a year and contend in a very daunted SEC.
Well, they're pairing Olabode and Javon Boggs with Courtney Crutchfield, who they got last cycle. Coop, I mean, I know we don't have a crystal ball, but let's look into it. Like, let's say Missouri has another good season, and this isn't to take anything away from the Tigers, but I think Drink is going to be a very hot name, and it's not just because of the on-field results, but how about this recruiting class? You just said it. They're sitting 13th in the rankings. How many teams in this new-look SEC would be more than pleased with this group? You said it. Matt Zollers is the quarterback of the future. They add two wide receivers that are nearly identical in Olabode and Boggs, both of them 6'1", 200 pounds, crafty route runners that can get open underneath, high volume pass catchers. Those guys are ready to go. Like I said, they're pairing him with Courtney Crutchfield from last cycle, James Madison. I think the strength of last year's group was on the defense, and then you look at the offense, what Missouri has done this cycle. They got two bookend tackles, Lamont Rogers, Jack Lang. I mean, this is a group to get fired up about. I think Drink, his name is only going to get, hotter. He's going to be on every hot list if they can continue to follow up what they did on the field this past season. I love the combination. I love how they're building this out. If we are running a recruiting department, This is how you want to do it, right? I said it. You got the two tackles. You see Lamont Rogers here on the screen, two wide receivers that fit that system. And then Matt Zollers, we saw at the Elite 11 finals, he's got a very, very high ceiling, has to come all together. But man, this group gets me excited about the future of Missouri football.
Can I pivot here for a second? You brought up Eli Drinkowitz being a hot name. I thought that there was some potential just in terms of the fit at Texas A&M. Nothing came of that. I believe Drinkowitz signed an extension fairly recently. Money being poured in from an NIL standpoint, money being poured in from a stadium renovation standpoint. Drew, hypothetically, and I know we love to play this game. We're in the middle of June, right? So we're kind of grasping at straws here. I'll put it that way. But if Florida came open, right? Billy Napier doesn't have the year that Gators fans expect. Is there any reason in your mind for Eli Drinkowitz to leave Missouri after what he's built, the foundation of what he's built? Because right now it seems like the arrow's going up. He's in a pretty cush spot. Missouri's further ahead than they've ever been in a really, really long time. I don't think there's any reason for him to look around and say, you know what, the grass is greener somewhere else.
Yeah, I would agree with you. It's kind of like Mark Stoops at Kentucky. I mean, it's the perfect situation. You said it. They're getting poured in. They have the most liberal name, image, likeness laws when we're talking about the show me state. I think on the flip side, if you're a Florida fan, and I keep going back to being out on the road in the spring, right? I was at IMG Academy spring game. Missouri had 4 coaches, I think, there. Their offensive coordinator, Kirby Moore, a few of those other guys. I was talking with them. They were FaceTiming Matt Zollers on the sidelines, showing him Donovan Olabode. And then they were hopping in the car and they were driving over to get Javon Boggs, see him practice there at Cocoa High School across the state, across I-4. I just think, Eli isn't really billed as a recruiter, but he's showing he can get the job done, him and his staff. So certainly I think if Florida were to come open, we'll see what happens this season. I mean, how could he not be at the top of the board when it comes to a wish list for fans?
All right, let's stick in the SEC and let's stick with the Tigers from one school to another. Missouri, not the only program doing some things in the SEC. Drew, how about LSU over the weekend, adding a couple top 247 commitments?
Yeah, this is my big firework, or my first one for the July 4th weekend. They add Damian Shanklin, top 247 edge rusher out of the state of Indiana. This is a guy we really like. We like his throwing metrics. Someone that only had a few sacks there as a junior, but I think he's going to take a big step forward here as a senior. And you think about LSU, right? Brian Kelly making all those comments a few months ago about, the premium you got to pay for pass rushers in the transfer portal. Look, LSU didn't sign a top 247 edge last year. Now they got 2 committed in Damian Shanklin. They're going to pair him with Jesse Harrell, the kid out of the Sunshine State. These 2 guys, to me, have a very, very high ceiling. You would have to think one of them is going to hit. LSU, they also flip a pair of interior linemen, Brandon Brown from Texas, and they land a pledge from Zion Williams over the weekend. Look, LSU needs to improve that defense. I think those 4 guys I just named can certainly do it. Damian Shanklin is a big, big win. I heard back in early June, LSU was in a good spot for him. They get the job done because a lot of those Midwest schools were also interested in Shanklin.
They seem to be the most or least talked about recruiting. I don't even call it recruiting power. I guess you could call them that. But they went out, they got Bryce Underwood, they got Harlan Berry, they had Decoria Moore committed at one time. They had a lot of early buzz in terms of the potential of this LSU class. Drew, it seems like the defensive side of the ball, Blake Baker, Corey Raymond, those guys starting to play catch up a little bit, Bo Davis as well. Talk to me a little bit about not so much Brandon Brown and Zion Williams of players, but it seems like LSU, they had this huge void at interior defensive line last year. These are 2 big pickups, guys that were high 3-star grades. You get one out of Texas, you flip one from Texas, one out of Florida. Drew, I watched the tape. Nothing in terms of sexy, but you talk about power, penetration, these guys being able to play the run, anchor the middle. LSU hasn't had that. And then you pair that with Bo Davis, his track record in terms of player development. This is kind of the hole that LSU needed to tend to. I feel like they have done that recently over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, I think these are the 2, and you said, I mean, they're high 3-star prospects for us. We'll see where they finish after the senior seasons when things finalized, but you're going to have to pay for those big interior, pocket pushers at some point, the guys that can anchor and play in multiple gaps up front. So do you want to do it in the transfer portal when everyone's after them, or do you want to go get them from the high school ranks and develop them with Bo Davis? That was the first thing that came to mind to me when they got those two, Zion and Brandon Brown over the weekend. Like, okay, this is what LSU needs to do. They also need to get the premium outside pass rushes, but they need to continue to refortify there in the middle. I think if you're an LSU fan, you should be fired up about those two commitments. And then you think about it, like you said, the rest of the class. I mean, there were some studs in there. It wasn't too long ago, Cooper, we said like they had our favorite offensive trio committed in Underwood, Harlem Berry, and Decorian Moore. Obviously, Decorian Moore is out, but they still got some really good talent in that recruiting class.
Shanklin, LeJesse Harrell. Like LeJesse Harrell, it's kind of the wild card. That's a one guy that can kind of go up or down. He's got everything that you want from an athletic trait standpoint. I think LSU is smart. Kevin Peoples, the outside linebacker coach, to bet on a guy like that. Add in Damian Shanklin from Indiana. Pretty interesting. Go all the way to the Midwest to get that kind of guy, but good get nonetheless. All right, let's stick in the SEC. My second firework here. Georgia, the Bulldogs, Drew, they're kind of scratching, clawing, trying to get in that number one class. Don't know if it's going to happen. Shamari Earls, they flip from South Carolina, top 75 player. Jalen Morgan, 4-star safety we like a lot. And then I'm going to let you talk about Jazeera Jackson a little bit. But the Shamari Earls kid, Drew, two-way guy out of the state of Virginia. This is a big loss for South Carolina, but it's a huge gain for Georgia. Jalen Morgan went back, revisited the tape this morning. A lot to like about him as well. I think he's going to fit in that star position quite nicely for the Bulldogs.
Yeah, Shamari Earls is one that stands out to me. You're good. You're good there, buddy. Look, we've been talking about him behind the scenes. I've been saying Shamari Earls. I want him in the All-American Bowl. I mean, he is a height, weight, speed corner, 6'1" plus 200 pounds. He's got 33-inch arms, really good track and field metrics. You said the two-way snaps. I think he's more of a linear player, but you think about Georgia, what they do on defense, how they get after the quarterback. This is a guy you can play on the perimeter, and let's not forget Georgia last year. They bring in Ellis Robinson. There were some question marks. Okay, what is Georgia going to do here in the secondary? Well, they zero in on Shamari Earls. They zero in on Jalen Morgan, and they get these guys committed. I mean, it's kind of the same way it's been for the Bulldogs. They usually get what they want. I think they're being smart here in terms of, all right, maybe they're not involved with the 5-star corners out there, the Naeem Offords, the DJ Pickett, but they're finding the next best thing. And we'll see what happens to Shamari Earls here during his senior season, but there's a lot to like there. Coop, they're also in it for Rashad Johnson, safety out of Florida. A lot of schools asking me about him. He's a guy that can fly around on the back end and hit people, fit right into that defense there for Georgia. So I love those two pickups. And then you want to talk about Jazz Jackson. Where do we even start? 6'10", 348 pounds. He's got a near 7'3" wingspan. He's a former semi-pro basketball player. I don't think he's played much, if any, football. There's some camp footage that's kind of floating around out there. I've seen some clips from Georgia. I've seen some clips from him at Florida State. Coop, I went back. Jazz Jackson, when I was covering Miami back in 2017, I took a photo of him. I have it saved on my computer. He was like an 8th grader that was considering moving down to South Florida, ends up playing basketball, was playing with Bronny on the AAU circuit. Then he's with Overtime Elite. I mean, this might be the biggest boom or bust prospect we have ever ranked him high 3-star grade. I mean, he has the traits. I don't know if it's all going to come together. I think the other thing with Jazz Jackson, you got to understand, he's 20 years old, right? So the clock is already ticking with him in terms of development, but he's going to be a member of that 2024 recruiting class. Coop, it is the Great Wall of Athens. They had 6 O-linemen already signed. They averaged 345 pounds a pop, all of them over 6'5". Somehow they managed to go find a guy that's even bigger than that to give them a 7th big man up front.
Guys, bear with me a little bit. I'm battling some allergies this morning. I don't know if it's my cat or what. Yes, Jazz Jackson, back to the point. Drew, it seems like a calculated shot. Like if you're Georgia, there's no reason not to absorb that type of body type into the room and just kind of see how it plays out. They have given themselves the insurance policy of what you've talked about, building consistently year over year with a lot of size, a lot of mass. They have guys that they feel good about developing. Now you got a guy in Jazz Jackson where the ceiling is completely high. I think we talked to some people around Georgia that felt like, hey, if this guy hits, we feel like we got something here. And if it doesn't work out, then we feel pretty good about our room. So Georgia, one of those teams, especially on the offensive line, stayed true to their identity. The Jalen Morgan, savvy pickup there. Shamari Earls, Drew, I feel like another guy we've talked about that can just keep climbing and climbing and climbing. Really, really excited about him. Drew, we've had some people ask about Miami. It's been a big few days for Miami. Let's talk about the Canes, Hilton Stubbs, SJ Alafatuli, Gavin Nix. Tell me what you like about the Canes.
Yeah, that's my second firework from the July 4th weekend. Went back, watched Harold Stubbs, Drake Stubbs, whatever he wants to go by. Watch Gavin Nix. To me, Hooper, these feel like throwback Miami type of players. Hair on fire defenders. They like to hit people. They get out there. They close gaps. They'll put their face mask right on someone. I mean, Hilton Stubbs, to me, very well-rounded safety prospect. You know, he's played in a two-deep posting. I think he's better in a low box roll closer to the line of scrimmage, but he's a guy that can track the football. Now, I think the foot speed is kind of the one question mark with him, 4.7 guy in the 40-yard dash. But, man, talk about someone in Lance Guidry's defense where you put him in position to make plays. There is a lot to like. I also saw Stubbs at the Top Gun camp in Naples, Florida a few weeks ago. He has added some really, really good size. I think he fits that defensive scheme perfectly. You could say the same thing about Gavin Nix, high IQ football player. He can read and react. To me, Miami, that recruiting class, where's the strength right now? I think it's at that second level of the defense. They are adding guys that fit what they want to do. Physical, smash mouth brand of football. Two really, really good pickups. Hilton Stubbs was committed to USC, opens it back up. Looks like Miami, Florida battle. The Hurricanes went out there. We're going to see them open up against each other week one. But I'm always about those Sunshine State recruiting battles. And then SJ Alafatuli, I mean, you want to talk about an offensive lineman. You work for Mario Cristobal. You work for Alex Mirabal. Like, can't they just get the most out of this individual? He's the perfect interior lineman for the Hurricanes.
I remember the first time I saw SJ Alafatuli, and I thought immediately to myself, like, this guy's going to end up in Miami for multiple reasons. Plays a lot of guard. I think this guy is a center the entire way in Coral Gables, 6'2 plus, 290 pounds, Drew. In terms of the physical upside, what he can be on Sunday, I don't know. I think there's a conversation there in terms of what he's going to be on Saturday. This guy's going to be the linchpin to your offensive line, can do so many different things, has a position flex to play guard as well. Playing at a Bishop Gorman program, you know he's going to be developed. A lot to like about him. I love this kid, love the fit there in Miami.
You doing all right? You got some red eyes.
Dude, I am battling right now, and I swear to God, if I'm allergic to my cat, I'm going to be pretty upset about that. I just adopted this thing like 3 or 4 weeks ago, so I don't know. Yeah, we're gonna have to recalibrate after the show. I'm battling, but we're trying to get through it. All right, let's talk a little bit of UW, Drew. We never talk about UW. UW up to number 17. Jed Fish said that he wanted to be the top-ranked class in Washington program history. They're aiming for one of their best finishes. 4 top 247 commitments. You look at this class, Darius Rainey Sale, they add from the state of Washington, champ to Layla, one of the top interior offensive linemen in the country. Chris Lawson, who I went back on, like a lot. Vanderploeg, the tight end. Jed Fish, UW. Drew, they just seem to have like this aggressive approach, not back down from anybody. They know who they are. They know who their identity is. You know, when he went to Arizona, It's Personal slogan. Like, I just feel like this kind of Jed Fish organization, they got like a chip on their shoulder about who they are. And the other thing is they trust the process. Whatever anybody else is doing, I don't think really has any impact on what they're doing on Montlake. They're top 20 right now. This should be a top 25 program year in and year out. I get a good feel. I think Oregon right now is a team that everybody's looking at, and they should for good reason. But UW, Drew, if they can recruit at this clip, they're going to be just fine in the Big Ten. And this is going to be a program, quite honestly, that I think can continue to take the momentum from Kalen DeBoer and keep that going as they go into a new conference.
You didn't even talk about the Hawaiian flamethrower, Tristan Kinney, one of my favorite undersized quarterbacks out there. I'm glad you brought up Chris Lawson because I had the same reaction to him when we were going through a few months ago, going through the back of that top 247. skeptical for some reasons, but man, I like him for what he is. Limber athlete. I don't know if we have clips of it up here, but man, his ability to cut back when the ball is in his hands, he just finds ways to get into the end zone. We know Washington has to rebuild that wide receiver room given what they have lost to the NFL draft. I think it's going to be some time before Chris Lawson's ready to go, but I like him. The speed, the wiggle as a route runner, really, really good take. And then you talk to our guys on the West Coast, Greg Biggins, Brandon Huffman, they are all in on Chris Lawson, the kid out of San Francisco. They think that area is so under-recruited. I think this is a sneaky good pickup for them. Hey, you know what I also like about him, Cooper? He's got a punt return touchdown on the ledger. I think that's very key. We saw it this past NFL draft, right? You want your playmakers, all those first-round wide receivers. They also got it done in the return game on Friday night. So Chris Lawson's, to me, is the one where I kind of have circled, all right, save him 2-3 years down the line. He's the one that could be fueling and driving that offense for the Huskies.
I like you, Dub. I think Jed Fish was the best coach that they could have hired, Troy Dana, before he left for Nebraska, and they get him in there. And I think a guy, God, what are they paying him? Over $7 million. So they're investing in that program. Obviously, going to be a team to watch in the Big Ten. I think they'll do just fine there. All right, last firework. Katy Perry here. SMU, Drew, here in the ACC. I have some thoughts on them, but how about this? Number 3 in the ACC right now. Ty Hawkins, they flipped from TCU. Jermod Odom's a guy we have in the top 64, number 7 offensive tackle in the country. Abel Hupe, number 64, Iowa. I know I just butchered that. Emily Proud did it so well yesterday.
You got to get that right. You had to talk about him yesterday during his commitment on 24/7 Sports. I thought it was Hoppy.
Yeah, I got teed up, dude. I mean, I'm obviously not on my P's and Q's right now. I'm struggling, battling these allergies. Anyway, they got 10 high schoolers in 2024. They finished 108 overall. They've never finished with a class ranked higher than 51st. They are just absolutely blazing past all that type of stuff. Drew, the first thing that came into my mind is like SMU, I think maybe in my eyes, I'm like, all right, we'll be patient with SMU. I don't think SMU wants to be patient at all. They had no patience getting into the ACC. They threw a bag. They got their way in. You see what they've done on the recruiting trail already. They have their coach in Rhett Lashley. They have money invested in the program. This is one of those teams right now, similar to what I talked about with Missouri. If they can get some wins and a very new look ACC, let's say they're bowl eligible, 7-8 wins. Now all of a sudden you got a team located in the heart of Dallas, one of the most fertile recruiting landscapes in all of the country. That's kind of like, all right, well, they're sitting there at number 3 in the ACC right now. That's kind of wide open outside of Clemson and Florida State. Miami's still working their way in there. Drew, the upside for this SMU program over the next 3 years, I think is pretty large when you kind of look at how everything's kind of shaken out in the state of Texas, Oklahoma, going to the SEC. I feel like SMU is kind of, they're looking around, and it's kind of like the John Travolta in the Quentin Tarantino movies. Look at Pulp Fiction. You're looking around, nobody else in the room. The opportunity is there for the Pony Express to get going. I think that's kind of the way SMU sees it.
Yeah, my third and final firework from the weekend, and it's sticking with the red, white, and blue, SMU. I woke up Monday morning, was going through the team rankings, obviously a ton of movements, and you kind of look up, you're like, whoa, number 20 overall, SMU. And you said it, Cooper, their average recruiting class finish in the 24/7 Sports era is 76. Now, they have been, Rhett Lashley and that staff have utilized the transfer portal very well. I think they took like 30 transfers last window. They've had a ton of success there, but now they're pivoting to the high school recruiting, and I absolutely love it. And we think about the new look ACC, okay? A lot of moving parts. I just think with SMU, and no one else is going to be talking about it on any other national podcast, keep an eye on them because Ty Hawkins, the quarterback they flipped from TCU, we like what we saw out of him at the Elite 11 finals. He's going to spend his senior season at IMG Academy, needs to cut down on the turnovers, but he is a supercharged athlete. He's ran for over 2,000 yards. You want to look for a player comp. I don't love this one, but he's very similar to De'Aaron King, who is now coaching the quarterbacks there in Dallas, is the primary recruiter on Ty Hawkins. I'm just saying, keep an eye on the Mustangs. about what they're going to look like in the ACC in the coming years. Look, SMU, we have to give them some credit here, Cooper. They lose Keelan Russell, who they were on from the jump. Instead of, going down the board, they go and swing at Ty Hawkins and they flip him from an in-state school. I mean, this is a top 247 quarterback and Elite 11 finalist. I think that's a notable pickup. Rhett Lashley and his staff, they got it cranking right there. Jermod Odoms, that's a prototypical tackle prospect. A lot to like about SMU's class right now.
I think they're going to be a little bit of like a nuisance, for a lot of these other programs out there. I think the biggest mistake that you can make if you're in Missouri, if you're at Texas Tech, if you're a Baylor or a TCU, is to look at SMU and say, all right, that's the group of 5 SMU. It's going to take them a few years to kind of, get their feet under them. I think the same logic applies for Houston and Willie Fritz. I mean, ask Sonny Dykes about this. He had Ty Hawkins committed, right? And goes out, gets flipped by Rhett Lashley. You cannot underestimate these dudes. I think SMU, Houston, they got a chip on their shoulder. They're coming out swinging. And if you're not careful, if you're Texas Tech, Baylor, TCU, Oklahoma State, the ground beneath you very quickly can shift in momentum of these programs that are now here on the Power 4 level, and they're looking to take advantage of it. And there's no complacency there, but they're kind of foaming at the mouth to make a name for themselves. So that's going to be really interesting to watch. Guys, just a reminder, you are locked into the 24/7 Sports Football Recruiting Podcast. You can find us, the Oyster Boys, every Tuesday and Wednesday at noon Eastern Time. Tell a friend. Make sure to like and subscribe. And if you have questions, make sure to get those in now. We will get to those at the end of the show. The uptick in recruiting. Guys, it's the time to jump on the bandwagon. The Oyster Boys, July all the way through December to February, postseason all-star events, All-American Bowl, Under Armour game. We got you covered right here. There's no better place to follow college football recruiting than right here on the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel. All right, Drew, we talked about it. Fireworks. What are fireworks without a couple duds, right? We got to talk about the duds. Sometimes you got that bottle rocket and it doesn't go off the way that you want it. So how about my first dud? Clemson, okay? And sometimes we're really harsh on Clemson. I'm just going to make an example out of Clemson because I think this is the reality for a lot of teams. They didn't make David Sanders' top 4. David Sanders is the number 1 offensive tackle in the country, number 3 player overall. I'm going to try to get through this without sneezing. Tennessee, Georgia, Ohio State, Nebraska, they're the top 4. Drew, I think it's pretty safe to say that all 4 of those programs from an NIL standpoint have showed enough to say that they're hashtag aligned. This one is a little bit surprising because we've had Tom Loy on the show every Wednesday for the last 2 months or so. And Clemson not only had crystal balls in their favor, but they seemed like they were in a firm spot with David Sanders. And it's interesting to me, and it's not just a David Sanders. I mean, you look at some of the other OVs, Cortez Mills, Clemson was once a leader, top 247 receiver. Kamar Archie, Clemson had him on campus. He commits to Rutgers. Samari Reed to Ole Miss. Gregory Zay Thomas to FSU. I don't know the situation with 2 or 3 of these guys. 2 of them I do. David Sanders, Cortez Mills, I think you look at those situations. Clemson is still recruiting like a traditional power, and they're recruiting really, really well at the high school level. I think that needs to be said. But I do think it's interesting that you invest so much time, not only on the early identification, evaluation, you get these players to campus multiple times. And then, especially in the case of David Sanders, at some point, something doesn't add up. And to me, I'm filling in the blanks here, but it's got to be the financial side, right? And if you're in it for a player like that, you have to understand the new landscape of NIL and where we are. I just find it fascinating. Why invest all that time? Like if you're Matt Luke, if you're Dabo Sweeney, and David Sanders, when you could pivot somewhere else on your board, maybe, second, third, fourth round, day 2, where you're still Clemson. And now you got to go down your board. You're sitting here in July, and the majority of these programs, especially at the top of the board, are filled up, right? And especially if you're looking for one of those premier tackles, I don't know, Drew. It just feels like a little bit of a disconnect there. Like, it's like, the game that you're in. This is going to be the topic of conversation. More than likely, you're not going to get the top tackle in the country at a discount. you have to know the game that you're playing, right? And for me to not know that, it's a little bit of lack of self-awareness, and that's kind of where I'm at with that. I'm not sliding Clemson. I don't think they did anything wrong here. But it's interesting to get that far down the line, be one of the teams that has done the most in the traditional recruitment, and then when push comes to shove on the new wave, it's like, yeah, you don't have a seat at the table because you're not even trying to be competitive.
Coop, let's also not forget, I mean, they were in it with Josh Petty at one point, and we were talking about Clemson potentially having the top offensive line class in the country. There was a few other targets that visited and have ended up elsewhere. Mario Nash, Max Buchanan. I mean, we liked what Matt Luke had, kind of the framework he had laid potentially for that O-line class. And like you said, it's dissolved here. I mean, Clemson sitting right now 14th in the rankings. There are parts we like. Love the defensive line haul for them. Like what they got in the secondary with Tay Harris, Grayson Littleton. But the reality is, in this, we said it first weekend of June. All right, if they don't get these visitors, they're going to have to pivot to a bunch of plan Bs. Now, I think they do an excellent job of that second tier wave, making the senior evaluations. But how much longer can they hang on without going into the transfer portal? Because they're not going to get a premium tackle out of there, right? That's why the David Sanders, the Josh Petties, those guys are so important to them, because they don't have the ability to go add that veteran, right? And I think they brought in a Division II offensive lineman this past year, and they ended up taking him, but they're not using the transfer portal. So the margin for error is so slim. And I thought that was notable as well. That's a great dud for over the weekend. Can't hear you, Coop.
I'm muted because I got allergies and I'm sneezing every 20 seconds. So I apologize. My question was, do you think that Dabo Swinney and Clemson are getting passed up? And what I mean by that is, we're talking about teams uh, like Missouri. We're talking about teams like Tennessee. We're talking about teams like Auburn, teams that are still got a little bit of edge trying to find their way back. Do you feel like Clemson is maybe kind of slipping in the rear view a little bit?
I do. And I think it starts at quarterback. Uh, you know, Blake Hebert, they got committed this past cycle. Had a chance to see him. I think we have him probably accurately ranked where he is. They get Tati Reynolds in the class of 2026. He commits Arizona State baseball commit. I mean, he's a dual threat type of talent, but from what we've seen of this wave of 2026 quarterbacks, I don't know if he's a for sure dude in that group. And 11 touchdowns to 11 interceptions there as a sophomore. He had one game where I think he threw over 5 picks. My biggest question mark for them is, okay, what is the long-term plan at quarterback post Cade Klubnik? I think that's a great question, Cooper. And those schools you brought up, Missouri with Matt Zollers, SMU with Ty Hawkins, I certainly begin to wonder about how they can hang and remain competitive in the ACC.
I don't know if they're recruiting well enough. And here's the thing, what's your standard? Somebody asked me this the other day. Well, they're a probable playoff team. Well, just expand it from 4 to 12. If that was still 4, I don't think they'd be in it. Are they a national championship contender? They're not recruiting good enough at the high school level. And let me say this, they're not using the transfer portal, so they have to be elite. Drew just brought it up. Like, their margin of error is so slim. You have to have the dude, the amplifier, the X factor at the quarterback position. They had that with Trevor Lawrence. They had that with Deshaun Watson, and they were recruiting their ass off at that point when they had those guys. They don't have that. They don't have that in Cade Klubnik. They don't have that in the next guy. I don't think that's going to be Vizina as well. Like, you have to have the dude. Miami went and got Cam Ward. I think Cam Ward makes Miami 2 to 3 games better. That's my point. You need that dude at the quarterback position. And guess what? If you don't have that guy, you're going to be what your roster is, which is probably 9-10 wins. And if you're okay with that, coming back and saying, well, we won 10 games and we've won the most games in Clemson history, that's fine. But you need to understand, you set this standard really high. You won multiple national championships. People understand, people in your fan base understand, your administration understand that there is a place that you can get to consistently. And my thing with Clemson, whether it's stubbornness, whether it's lack of self-awareness for whatever expectations, and they're not far off. And the other thing about this is it's all correctable. They can all fix it quite easily, and they just choose not to do it. So I don't know. I've said it multiple times. I love Clemson. I think the program's got all the ability to be a top 5 program in the country. I think Dabo Swinney has showed that again and again. There's just some things that are a little bit more than tweaks that need to really get addressed, in my opinion.
Last thing on them, they got 13 commits right now. We pointed to that first weekend of June. So important that they get a lot of those guys in the boat, right? All in, if that's the phrase you want to use, because they're going to have to pivot elsewhere. Cooper, last cycle they signed 21 prospects. One of those guys is already transferred out. Another's a kicker, so it's really 19. This cycle, they're at 13 commits. Are they going to get to 25? Are they going to get to 30? At some point, it is a numbers game. You go back to when Clemson was the toast of the ACC. What was the difference? Week 6, week 7, week 8, your starting corner goes down. The guy coming off the bench is a 4 or 5-star prospect. Clemson has lost that luxury right now within this name, image, likeness era, because they're not able to fill out their recruiting class with that because other people are paying for the premium talent and you're not bringing it in through the transfer portal. So that's the thing. Like, yes, they have some high-end talent, but the depth of the rosters, or I think you begin to run into a majority of the issues, and I think that's going to be a big problem for the Tigers moving forward.
All right, you're done. And we've had some fans in the chat bring it up already. And the funny thing is, when we put the rundown together, you and I were kind of crossing paths on this one. But Drew, this one is on you. You're taking this on the chin. What you got here?
What do I have here? I think it was like 3 or 4 weeks ago. I wrote, okay, where is Michigan's post national championship bump on their recruiting trail? At the time, they were sitting 41st in the rankings. After the July 4th weekend, that was a dud of a take. I'm no longer too concerned about what the Wolverines and Sharon Moore are going on. Up to number 11, they flip Ivan Taylor, one of my favorite safety prospects in the class from Notre Dame. They add Andrew Olesh, one of our favorite tight ends out here. Did an interview this morning with the Michigan site, just kind of my thoughts on the recruiting class. Cooper, I like this. To me, Ivan Taylor, when I went through and I watched all the blue chip soon-to-be seniors in the Sunshine State, their spring games, I thought he had a good of a spring game as anyone. He's a high IQ defender. I think you can play him 3, 4, 5 different spots in the secondary. Andrew Olesh tested off the charts back in May. He's a perimeter receiver. I think the more you watch of Andrew Olesh, you figure out, okay, this guy's also plays some safety. He's physical. I think he has the tools to emerge as a game breaker on Saturdays in the Big Ten. So I no longer am concerned about Michigan's recruiting class. That is my dud of a take from a few weeks ago.
I should know better just in terms of like rushing to judgment. I feel like I've done this a couple times, and I got to give a lot of credit to Sharon Moore, but his staff as well. How about guys like Sam Popper, their director of recruiting, Albert Karshnia? I've worked with all those guys, two very bright minds. Sean McGee at the top. They kind of told me, they said, "Hey, it's coming. It's coming. It's coming." And Drew, you said it, to be able to get Ivan Taylor, they flip him a safety you're really high on. Andrew Olesh, I think a guy similar, not so much play style, but just in terms of how we view the player and where he is in his timeline, kind of similar to Luke Reynolds. He's kind of, finding his way into our hearts a little bit. The more and more you watch him, the more you like him. Gotten to see him out in LA. Top 100 player. And Drew, they've done some really, really nice things. Now up to number 11, you got Andrew Babaloa, the 5-star offensive tackle out there, right? We kind of it was a call to arms. Like, you should be able to beat Stanford head to head. And that's no offense against Troy Taylor or Al Netter or anybody at that program. But Michigan, Stanford, that's what the head to head should look like. So Michigan right now up to number 11 in the recruiting rankings, starting to get going. They got too much going on, too much positive at that program not to be where they are right now. But Drew, that leads us to our grand finale, and they've been the talk of the town, especially over the last couple of days in the recruiting landscape. I did an interview with Cole Kublik, Birmingham radio, Greg McElroy, and guess what? It wasn't Alabama, it wasn't Auburn that we're talking about. It was Oregon. The grand finale here of all the fireworks. Dan Lanning, the Danimal, the maniacal man right there recruiting, the Kirby Smart protege. Well, they go out, they land Decorian Moore, the number 5 player in the country, number 1 receiver overall. Drew, you have brought this up. The Ducks have never signed more than 3 5-stars in the same class. They're pacing for the first back-to-back top 5 ranked recruiting classes in the modern era. Could potentially land 5 stars. You look at guys like Jonah Williams, DJ Pickett, they're still out there. Drew, we've talked about the alignment, right? I think there was an article that came out earlier in the week talking about Phil Knight. He's 86 years old, and I can tell you from personal experience talking to him when I worked at Oregon, that's a guy that wants to win. And a guy that's very involved, more so than a lot of people would think in that program, the day to day, and what it looks like, and what type of talent, what type of people they're bringing into that program. I think they're just doing some tremendous things. Junior Adams, Rashad Samples, he's built that staff exceptionally well. Now they go into Texas, they get DeCorian Moore. Drew, you and I have talked about the mass that they have brought in. When they go outside of the West Coast, I feel like it's well intended for guys that they feel like they can't get in that footprint. But if they can stick out there, they're going to dominate that area, and that's what they've done. I guess my question for you would be, is this the expectation going forward for Oregon? Like top 5 recruiting classes, guys potentially battling it out for number 1 against Ryan Day and Kirby Smart?
I think it has to be, right? I mean, given what Dan Lanning did last cycle, what we know about him as a recruiter, this is going to be potentially their first back-to-back top 5 ranked recruiting class in the 24/7 sports era. So as far back as I could go in the 24/7 sports composite team rankings, this is the standard now. And you look at the visitors list, the guys that they brought in during the month of June, it was 5-star after 5-star after 5-star. Coop, we were on the show last week talking about the battle for the number 1 ranked recruiting class. I think I surprised a lot of people. I said, well, hey, what about Oregon? They didn't have a lot of guys committed. I noted the runway is there for them to make a move. Now, did I know DeCorian Moore was going to surprise everyone and pick the Ducks on July 4th? No, I didn't know, but I thought, hey, this is a program that has unlimited funding in a sense, and they want to win. They're doing what it takes to win. And you said it. I think that staff does an excellent job because you still have to build the relationship with the prospect. You still have to talk them into being a part of your offense, coming in and having success there. And DeCorian Moore, he seems to be all in. Now, what else can they go out there and get? You said it, Jonah Williams, DJ Pickett. I've always had this kind of sneaky suspicion that the Ducks are a team to watch. I mean, I was at a USF mega camp, Coop, and DJ Pickett was there hanging out. Why was he hanging out? It was because Dan Lanning was flying in on a private jet to get some FaceTime with the number 3 ranked corner in the class of 2025. Michael Terry's out there. You just go up and down the list. And, I think Oregon's also in position where they're going to find some late risers out there. Guys are up in the moving up the board. Like, this isn't just Oregon getting hot right now. Like, I think Dan Lanning is as dangerous as anyone when we get closer to the signing periods, when we get into December, when we get into January. So to me, there's certainly a team to watch. And I know this is a long-winded answer, but yes, I think this is the standard at Oregon right now, as long as Dan Lanning's there and as long as Phil Knight is opening up the checkbook.
I think it's one thing to have cap space, and that's what I'll call it. It's another thing to be a team that understands the cap and understands who to pay, when to pay them. And I think that's a really big thing. And the other thing is, you got Evan Stewart transfer from Texas A&M out of the state of Texas. They're doing some really good things in the state of Texas. You piggyback off of that, you get DeCorian Moore. Sacramento Kings are out there giving DeMar DeRozan $60 million. Like, do you want to be the Sacramento Kings or you want to be the Oklahoma City Thunder? I guess what I'm saying is you can see levels of this at every single level. Just because you have the financial aptitude to do things doesn't mean that you should be silly with them. I like what they're doing. I think they're extremely calculated. You got to give Marshall Malkow a ton of credit running things over there from a personnel standpoint. So Oregon right now looking very, very, very real. I know Josh Pate came out with that segment talking about, the top 15 programs over the next 3 years. I believe he had Oregon in the top 4. It was either number 3 or number 4. I think they're real. I think they're legit. I think they're going to get their hands on some hardware, the big one here in the next 2 to 3 years conservatively. All right, Drew, with that, let's open up some viewer questions. And another guy that is connected to the Ducks that we didn't even talk about, but living rent-free in UT says, can y'all give a breakdown of athlete Michael Terry and advise his most likely position at the college level? What a great question. I feel like we've talked about this quite a bit. Drew, I think it's fair to say it kind of depends on who you ask, right?
Yeah, well, this isn't one where I'm trying to play him on defense and you're trying to play him on offense. That was kind of like the Terry Bussey debate. Look, Michael Terry, our guys, Hudson Standish, Gabe Brooks, just saw him at the Texas State 7-on-7 tournament. They sent me some clips of him. I mean, he is listed at 217 pounds. I think that's pretty accurate. I always have this vivid memory of him when we were at the All-American Bowl. Me and you were going to dinner, shook hands with him. I thought it was an edge rusher, and like, no, that's Michael Terry, one of your top-ranked prospects in the class of 2026. He was just in street clothes. I think he's a weapon. Cordell Patterson is kind of where I've gone with my player comp. In terms of like just a receiver that can also add value in the return game. And Cordell Patterson obviously made a career of doing that on Sundays. To me, I think slot receiver. I think, Cooper, you lean towards running back. I mean, he's a guy you just take and figure out later. I mean, the more exposure we get to him, the more we see him, the more we fall in love with him. And that's where he's ranked where he is right now, because all of us feel that good about him when we look at this whole 2025 class, through the lens of like, all right, who are our guys we want to hitch our wagon to? Michael Terry's certainly one of them.
Yeah, how about this athletic profile? 6'2", 3/4, 211 pounds. Granted, this was from March of last year, right? And you're talking about a guy with a 6'6" wingspan, track and field background, 10.83, 22.78, 400 meters at 49.4, 6'4" high jumper. Drew got the basketball background as well. Three-phase player. You see him return punts and kicks, play defense as well. I think a lot of people thought, all right, this guy's going to be a second-level defender. I think in an ideal world, knew he wanted to play offense. Running back, receiver, I think you're kind of splitting hairs here. I think he's a little bit more natural at the running back position. Jaheim Bell, Cordell Patterson, to your point, kind of those big jumbo type of guys that you can move around. You can do a lot of different things with. I think you need to have a vision for the player. I think it would be wrong to kind of put him in a box and say this is what he is. I think the most important thing for him is to play in like a Kyle Shanahan-esque type of offense and find a way to really kind of create and scheme up some touches for this guy in a unique way, because he's a unique athlete that can do a lot of different things. So whether it's Texas or whether it's Oregon or whether it's somebody else, I feel really good about those two just in terms of their creativity under Steve Sarkisian and Will Stein.
Oh, yeah, I think we've had an answer in the past. Okay, like where do we think the best fit is? I think we've said if we are in Michael Terry's camp, I would keep a close eye on what Kenyon Sadiq does this year for the Oregon Ducks. And then I think Texas, the pitch is easy. Come be Jatavian Sanders. We will also use you at running back, because you look at all the running backs we've had drafted recently, they're all over 200 pounds. Like, I think Texas has the most ammo from an on-field perspective with Steve Sarkisian calling plays. Like, we will find a way to get you involved, and you can do it in a variety of different ways. So those are, I feel like we've answered that before, Cooper, right?
Yes. Yeah. At some point we had a long-winded conversation on Michael Terry, but I would say this, like running back, receiver, I don't think it really matters where your program, if it does end up being your favorite program, ends up taking Michael Terry, just a guy that you should be thankful for to have on the field. All right, Drew, another question from Andrew. He says, so obviously subjective, but if the Ducks manage to reel in DJ Pickett, Jonah Williams, and Trey McNutt, that would be quite a haul there. All three of those guys are 5 stars at the moment. Which DB haul is more impressive, Oregon or Ohio State? And let me get some context to that. Devin Sanchez, Naeem Alford, 2 corners currently committed to Ohio State, both ranked inside the top 10. Fahim Delane, right, another guy that we're really high on, and I'm missing one right outside the top 247 that I think we like a lot out of New Jersey.
I'm looking. Deshaun Stewart. No,
but
is that right?
Sounds right.
Deshaun Stewart.
That being said,
so many names.
Trust yourself, man. That's a great question. I mean, I think all those guys are very different. I think Pickett and Sanchez are probably the most similar out of the two. Drew, I just think it's hard. I mean, you look at Ohio State, what they've done. I think those guys complement each other extremely well. You're talking about Sanchez, Alford. Alford's a guy that you can kind of move around. I've kind of comped him to Kyler Gordon, but believe it or not, he might be a better athlete, which is a crazy thing to say. Worked with Kyler Gordon at Washington, had a 42-inch vertical, one of the more dynamic guys that I've seen, a second-round pick of the Chicago Bears. But Jonah Williams, different cat. Like, is he going to be a safety? Is he going to be a linebacker? It's another guy that can spin down. McNutt, certainly a guy that's very impressive, can do a lot of different things. I'd probably give the edge to Ohio State, more just kind of prototypical. Those guys are really hard to find from a height, weight, speed standpoint. I love the complementary piece of Fahim Delane, a guy that can roll down, play closer to the line of scrimmage, match up with bigger body tight ends. But I mean, quite honestly, these are legit hauls. I mean, you stack up like Oregon or Ohio State to what Alabama did last year with Xavier Brown and Mbakwe and Zay Mincy. It's kind of like, yeah, take your pick, man, whatever your flavor is, So all three of those, including Alabama last year, but yeah, Ohio State and Oregon, if Oregon was able to put that together, would be an absolutely insane defensive secondary class.
Coop, so he said Oregon would add Pickett, McNutt, Jonah Williams, right?
Correct.
Those are the three he said. Okay, I'm gonna say this. I'm a big fan of Devin Sanchez, obviously. Big fan of Naeem Offord. I keep going back to the OT7 performance for Devin Sanchez. Unreal. That was an all-timer for me in that 7-on-7 circuit. Kind of rivals what Ellis Robinson did at the Under Armour All-America game practices last year when he had like 4 picks in one-on-ones. Like, he is the real deal, as good as advertised. I'm going to go Oregon here. And you mentioned those three, but they also have Dorian Brew committed, top 64 corner for us out of Texas. And then this kid, Brandon Finney, out of the DMV, who has quickly kind of like flown under the radar. He's a guy I think you could put a rocket to his back and shoot him up the rankings. Hudson Standish on our scouting team, got to see him at the Under Armour camp up there. He is a box checker, I think, as a perimeter corner. He's a guy that can run with pretty much anyone. So you're taking those two already. We're throwing Jonah Williams in here, who is, a freak. I mean, he might just play MLB baseball. And then DJ Pickett and who was the last one? Trey McNutt. I would go Oregon just based off the depth, because I think you got a lot of different interchangeable parts, and you could get pretty creative on the back end there.
There you go. Drew, I think we've talked about this at times. We've gotten the question about Will Black, committed to Notre Dame, a guy that we currently have in the top 247 out of Connecticut. Is he going to get a boost in the rankings? We'll see. If it happens, more than likely would happen during his senior year, sometime in the fall. Like Andrew said at the top of the show, this next update going to be primarily focused on quarterback moves. In recent live exposures, we have not seen Will Black recently. So we're going to have to wait until the senior season, more than likely, on him. Drew, here's another question. What do you guys think about the 2026 cornerback position after the Future 50? Haven't heard much buzz about them compared to the class of 2025 at this point in the process. Great question there. And Drew, I'm going to buy you a little bit of time to pull up that Future 50 board if you're doing the same thing that I'm doing right now. Looking at this 2026 group, I think you are a lot more well-versed than I am. But in the 2026 group, can I say one name before you jump me? Can I say one name? Jet Washington. Yeah, you talk about a physical specimen out of Bishop Gorman, 6'4", 3/4. I don't know what they're putting in the waters out west. Just in terms of what we've seen from the cornerbacks out there lately. DJ Lee, Jet Washington. Drew, when you think about a 6'4" plus corner at 180 pounds, I think sometimes you think there's going to be a little bit of stiffness. Jet Washington, in terms of what we saw from him at the Future 50, looked like one of the most dynamic guys out there. I thought he had a great week. So that was one guy that kind of stood out. And the other kid, not a corner, but Blaine Bradford. Been meaning to bring his name up. I didn't know what to expect. I thought he was a little stiff on tape. I thought he was more of a straight line guy. He came out to Tampa. He moved really well. A lot freer mover than I anticipated. Fluid hips. Really, really excited to see him this junior season out of Catholic in Baton Rouge.
I mean, those are two good names. I don't know if I classify either as a corner. Looking at the list right now, and you're right, Coop. I mean, I have a ton of exposure to the 26. I don't think it's as top heavy at this stage as 2025. We don't even have a corner in the quote unquote top 32 right now. Justice Fitzpatrick, Minka's brother, is our highest ranked corner. We'll see. We're going to get into the 2026 rankings here in a couple of weeks if he still holds number one. But in terms of the guys we saw at the Future 50, a lot smaller compared to maybe what we got in this 2025 cycle. I mean, think about it. Devin Sanchez, Naeem Offord, DJ Pickett, Dijon Lee, Adonis Curry, all those guys are well over 6'1". The individuals we had in Bradenton, Zion Gibson, Victor Singleton, Elbert Hill, RJ Sermons. I mean, I think all of them are 6 foot on the dot, are on the shorter side. I'll say one guy that I've come around on that I'm starting to like more and more, Samari Matthews out of North Carolina. Clemson's the early leader on the crystal ball there, but everyone has offered him. I thought the sophomore tape was okay, and then having seen him at camps and tournaments, he's got the size, he's got the foot speed. He's a guy I think could rise up the board for us. I think Jalen Waters, who flipped his commitment from Florida State to Florida, I mean, that just seems like a recruitment that's going to be all over the place. He's a kid out of Florida. I think he's had a good offseason. Dominique Kelly, who's committed to USC, another one. I think it's still early with the position. I don't think there's a clear-cut like alpha. And I think the past couple of recruiting cycles, we have known those individuals. I mean, go to 2023, right? So Ellis Robinson, I mean, he was kind of a dude from the jump. We had Cormani McLean, the year as well. AJ Harris. So I think it's lacking a little bit right now, and the junior seasons will be big. And I'll say this: it's early, but there's reason to believe 2027 is going to be pretty loaded at corner. We're going to see an uptick back there. Talking with Greg Biggins out on the West Coast in California. Seems like every national event we go to, there's like a 6'1" kid from California that's like running 10-6 and making plays. So I think 27 will be good for corner just based on where we're at right now.
Always looking ahead, buddy. That's why we love you. All right, let's get out on this one, Drew. And I think it's a good question. I think one that you and I have talked about in recent times as well. Andrew, again, with another fire question. Good job, Andrew. He says, if DK Moore was in last year's receiver group, where would you have slotted him? Because obviously Jeremiah Smith would stay at number one, obviously. But would Moore be number two, even lower? Also, this is kind of a down year at receiver, question mark. I do think it's this year at receiver. I got asked yesterday on the radio hit, like, how big is the gap between DK Moore and Khalil Lockett? I think there is a ton of separation there. Maybe not as much from 5 to 11 shows, but I do think there is a lot of separation in terms of what the caliber of receiver that you're looking at. Drew, what do we have? 7 receivers in the top 32 last year. Looking at the rankings, I would probably have DK Moore, in my opinion, at number 5 behind TJ Moore. I think you could say as high as number 3 in front of Ryan Williams. But just in terms of those guys where they are height, weight, speed game, I think DK Moore, he checks every box. He's 5'11 plus. He's 180 pounds. He's muscled up. He's ready to go. I think those 4 ahead of him probably have a little bit more developmental upside that would be more attractive to potential NFL suitors 3 years down the line.
Yeah, I think it starts for me at number 3, right? Him or Ryan Williams, who used to be a member of this recruiting cycle before he reclassified. I think that's where the conversation is. And you said it. I mean, DeCorian Moore, we love everything about him. He's just a bit on the smaller side. With that being said, I think he plays bigger than the numbers suggest. And what do we mean by that? His ability to make tested catches, his ability to high point the football for a guy that is under 6 foot. I think it's some of the best we have seen. I agree with you. I think Jeremiah Smith, Cam Coleman, I mean, we've had the college exposure to them. We saw what they were able to do at Ohio State and Auburn, respectively, during those 15 spring practices. I mean, the buzz is at an all-time high. So I think 3 or 4 for me. I would have him ahead of TJ Moore. That's where I would go with him.
I would say TJ Moore, just going off subject here, one of the best live exposures, I think, over the last 3 years, just in terms of not only what we saw in the game itself at the All-American Bowl, the 5-star receiver going to Clemson, But what we saw that entire week, and that was a guy that rocketed up the board. Loved the developmental upside there. DK Moore, certainly electric.
So, so
Drew,
TJ
yeah.
Moore, TJ Moore, where would he be in the 25 rankings?
Whew. You could get aggressive with him. I think what's different about that hypothetically is DJ Moore or TJ Moore, excuse me, was this guy that we didn't fall in love really with the tape. We liked the tape. I thought, athletically everything was above average to good. And then we got him at the All American Bowl, and we just saw had a completely different experience with him. You can say it was a little bit of recency bias, but he was bigger than we thought. He moved better than we thought. He got in and out of breaks. He was strong at the catch point. You see the developmental upside. Like I think that kid's going to play 195, 200 pounds. So I guess what I'm saying is the AAB was obviously the last exposure, but if you had that exposure and then you applied that here, it's interesting. You got more at number 5 right now with Decorian. You could go as high as there, but I would probably say, 10, 11. I think that would probably be the most natural fit. So, Drew, any final thoughts before we get out of here? We got a top 247 release tomorrow. Make sure to catch that on 24/7 Sports, the YouTube channel, in 247sports.com. Drew, any last comments?
No final takeaways, buddy. Looking forward to this update. Again, not a ton of wholesale changes. You didn't even tee me up on the Will Black. I mean, we're only moving guys that we had some type of exposure to or some type of new information over the past month. I mean, we were in May, coming back in July. More changes coming during the season than obviously those All-Star games.
Well, I didn't want to tee you up, get you frustrated. Nothing to be frustrated about there. Guys, just a reminder, you can find us every Tuesday, Wednesday, noon Eastern time. Andrew Ivins, Cooper Petagna, always bringing you everything you need to know. Thanks to our producers, Chris Belcher, Aaron Grisham, as always. Guys doing a phenomenal job. And thanks to you guys. Make sure to like and subscribe. Remember, tomorrow we got the ranking show. Be there or be square. And without further ado, we'll see you next week.